Hollywood has always been a little hesitant to tell stories where humanity loses, especially the kind that suggest the human race might not be the smartest, strongest, or most impressive species the universe has to offer. Of course, there are plenty of movies about nuclear war wiping us out, but we already covered those in another video. You'll find the link in the description. Today, we're looking at a different kind of defeat. Films where humanity goes head-to-head with the natural world and gets completely trounced, usually by something we foolishly assumed was a lower form of life. Let's start with The Birds from 1963. Years before the wave of 70s nature in revolt movies like Bug and Food of the Gods, Alfred Hitchcock had already laid down the blueprint. The difference is that most of those later films still let humanity win in the end. People eventually regain control and put nature back in its place. Hitchcock offers no such comfort. In The Birds, the premise is simple. Birds suddenly begin attacking people for no clear reason, forcing the residents of a quiet town to hide indoors while flocks gather outside. The film ends with the Brenner family slowly driving away while dozens of birds watch them in silence. It might look like an escape, but it doesn't feel like a victory. Nobody defeated the birds, and nobody figured out what caused the attacks. Hitchcock originally wanted an even darker final image. A long shot of the Golden Gate Bridge completely covered in birds, suggesting they had already taken over San Francisco as well. Quite how he planned to film that is unclear, considering most of the birds in the movie were real. Was he going to cover the bridge in breadcrumbs? Hard to say. Either way, the ending we got already makes the point perfectly clear. The birds haven't lost. They've just taken a break. The summer of 1977 was a busy moment for nature in revolt movies. Bud Cardos released his tarantula invasion film the same year as Empire of the Ants and Day of the Animals. But that same summer, Star Wars changed what audiences wanted from spectacle, and killer animals suddenly had a harder time competing for attention. Even so, Kingdom of the Spiders had a few things going for it. One was the cast, which included William Shatner and Woody Strode. Another was the villains themselves. Regular-sized tarantulas can be a lot creepier than giant ants or rampaging animals. Shatner plays a veterinarian who discovers that his small southwestern town sits in the path of an advancing tarantula threat. At first, it sounds like something that should be easy to stop. But once the spiders start attacking livestock and people, the situation quickly spirals out of control. His character throws everything he can at them: poison, gasoline, fire. None of it works. For most of the film, it looks like a fairly typical Nature Strikes Back story, where humanity eventually finds a way to fight back. Then, the movie reaches its final moments and makes it very clear that this time, that isn't happening. Production reports and later accounts say the filmmakers used around 5,000 real tarantulas. Because the spiders are naturally cannibalistic, they were reportedly kept warm in separate containers so they wouldn't start eating each other. Which means that somewhere on that set, there were thousands of individual tanks, each holding a single tarantula. Probably not the most comfortable workplace if you happen to be an arachnophobe. But let's go back a couple of years, to 1972, and a film called Frogs. It's often remembered as one of the early entries in the Nature in Revolt cycle. The poster certainly leaned into that idea. It showed a giant bullfrog with a human hand hanging out of its mouth. Just to set expectations right away, there are no giant frogs in this movie. The poster promised something very different, and a lot of audiences felt a bit tricked when they actually saw the film. If you don't expect giant frogs, though, the movie is actually worth a watch at least once, if only because at times it becomes unintentionally funny. The story follows Pickett Smith, a wildlife photographer, played by Sam Elliott, who ends up on the private island estate of a wealthy family led by Jason Crockett, played by Ray Milland. Crockett has gathered his family for a 4th of July and birthday celebration. The island looks peaceful, but the surrounding marshland has been heavily polluted by pesticides and other chemicals meant to wipe out wildlife. Smith quickly notices that the local animals are behaving strangely. Frogs, snakes, lizards, spiders, birds. The whole ecosystem seems agitated. Crockett dismisses the danger and treats the surrounding environment as something humans should control. You can probably guess where this is going. The story itself stays confined to that one island and the swarm of creatures living on it. But the message is clear enough. If nature really has started pushing back, it won't stop there. Conquest of the Planet of the Apes is probably the most openly political film in the original Apes series. The story takes place in a grim future where apes have been turned into obedient servants, trained to do household work, and treated as disposable property. At the center of it all is Caesar, played by Roddy McDowall, who quietly begins organizing the apes against their human masters. The film's violent revolutionary climax draws clear inspiration from the Watts riots of the 1960s, and by the time the uprising begins, the movie has already spent plenty of time showing exactly how humans treat the apes. Beatings, electric prods, constant intimidation. After watching all that, it's not exactly shocking that some resentment starts to build. Once the revolt finally erupts, humans suddenly don't look so dominant anymore. Even with guns, riot gear, and electric weapons, they end up looking helpless and a little pathetic when faced with a crowd of very angry apes armed with whatever tools they can find. The studio eventually toned down Caesar's final speech, shifting it away from full revolutionary fury towards something a little more conciliatory. But the message still comes through clearly enough. The apes are done taking orders. And looking across the whole series, humans rarely come off well anyway. Most of the time we're portrayed as arrogant, unpleasant, and not nearly as competent as we think we are. So when the apes finally take over the streets in Conquest, the movie almost shrugs and says, well, maybe we had that one coming. Ants have always made the perfect threat to humanity. No matter how many cans of insecticide you go through, there are always more ants waiting. They're tiny, incredibly strong for their size, and far more organized than we are. So it's no surprise that sinister ants have been creeping through science fiction for decades. But few ant movies are quite like Phase 4, the only film directed by legendary title designer Saul Bass. The story begins when something strange happens in the Arizona desert. Local ant colonies start building tall towers in the middle of the desert. Two scientists set up a fortified research station to study what's going on, hoping they can figure it out before things get out of control. By the end, it becomes clear that the ants are no longer just another species living on Earth. They've developed their own plan for the planet, and humans are no longer the ones in charge. And one more interesting detail about the film: the geometric patterns created by the ants strongly resemble crop circles, years before those shapes became famous through UFO hoaxes in the 1980s. We've already had birds, spiders, frogs, ants, and even apes. Now it's time for rats. Rats: Night of Terror is a post-apocalyptic Italian exploitation film set in a future shaped by nuclear catastrophe. And since this is Italian exploitation cinema, things get a little unhinged. The film was directed by Bruno Mattei. Watching it, though, you might occasionally get the impression it was made without a director at all. The story follows a group of survivors wandering through the wasteland. They eventually take shelter in an abandoned complex in the desert, only to discover it's completely overrun by hordes of killer rats. The action is silly, the effects are cheap, and the dialogue can be pretty laughable. The rats themselves are often just small rodents painted to look more menacing. It may not sound very scary, and honestly it isn't, but those little guys just keep coming. Most of the film is basically people running around the building, throwing rodents at each other, and whispering about a mysterious underground civilization. The movie does save something special for the final moments, and in a so-bad-it's-good way, Rats: Night of Terror delivers exactly the kind of chaos midnight movie fans are looking for. The Day of the Triffids is a British production based on John Wyndham's 1951 novel. The story begins when a mysterious meteor shower blinds most of the world's population overnight. At the same time, a new threat appears. Triffids, tall, mobile plants with venomous stingers, begin spreading everywhere and preying on people. With most of humanity unable to see, they become very easy targets. The movie relies heavily on sound design and editing to create tension, which helps quite a bit because the plants themselves move slowly and can look a little cheesy on screen. In some ways, the film almost feels like an early version of the zombie apocalypse story. A sudden catastrophe collapses society, large numbers of helpless people wander around blindly, and small groups of survivors struggle to stay alive while fighting over whatever resources they can find. The Day of the Triffids has also gained a bit of cult status over the years. It even gets a shout-out in the opening song of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which includes the line about Jeanette Scott fighting a Triffid that spits poison and kills. And the last two films on today's list are both versions of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original from 1956 and the remake from 1978. Don Siegel's film already had a terrifying premise, an alien invasion so quiet and so subtle that most people don't even realize it's happening. Before the studio added a new opening and coda to soften it, the ending was even darker. But even in the released version, the hopelessness is still there. The 1978 version is even bleaker. Kevin McCarthy screaming, "You're next!" at passing cars remains one of the most desperate images in science fiction. Philip Kaufman doesn't offer much comfort, and by the end, there is no sense that humanity can fight this thing off. The pods have already won. And that's it for today's list. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it or hit the hype button below. And feel free to add your own picks in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.